I have been exposed to so many mosquito bites in an activity yesterday that I am going to shut down my video camera. And I request that you double click on the slide so that you can see the full presentation. We have an awful lot of background to go through in order to appropriately get you to the points that I'm hoping to make today about the Waterscape experience and how it relates to a water justice agenda. So I'm going to take you through three very simple purposes. Goals of today is the brief introduction to Headwaters Institute and Waterscape. And at the end, I'm going to share what I consider our 7 guidelines for meaningful community engagement. Very simply, we started in 2003 with a mandate based on our name to protect small streams and wetlands and upland areas that are the source of our rivers and flow into receiving waters such as our lakes. Various currents such as the review of the provincial policy statement, land use planning reviews, the Crombie Commission, and the development of biodiversity indicators and the Great Lakes Protection Act got us into larger fora. And so in 2018, we expanded our mandate through amended letters patent, and we are a full watershed management organization. In that regard, demonstrating how we got drawn into these things, we launched a Waterscape, what we thought was our one and only Waterscape project. It turned out to be the first of 3 in response to a government initiative to grow the greenbelt in the outer ring. And during that, we had 2 provincial partners, the Ontario Environment Network and Canadian Environmental Law Association, as well as 13 partners who helped us stage 6 meetings in an arc from Niagara Falls over to Peterborough with 150 participants. What we heard in those meetings of great interest to this agenda and this conference today is that people felt very strongly that water and natural heritage were not being protected across Ontario, and they were not being protected equally. For example, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan is great. There are watershed management aspects of the green belt that provide more or less protection than other areas of the province and more resources. There was an incredible high support for agriculture, which is often under-recognized in the environmental community, but clearly people cared deeply about agriculture and a transition to sustainable agriculture. There were tremendous expressions about aggregates. We certainly heard that today. And overall poor planning, and that Ontario must aggressively pursue ending the conditions that cause boil water advisories and to pursue water conservation. What we took away from this, for those of you, I'm maybe a little older than others on the line, but during Lands for Life and the community mapping exercises on the creation of the Greenbelt demonstrated incredible capacity within the public to understand both their local landscape and provincial planning and municipal planning policy issues and their implementation. It always reinforces my trust and admiration for what people know. And currently this government doesn't tend to do that. And so part of pursuing a water justice agenda would be to have more attention to and conversation with the community. Waterscape 2 was sort of what I call the segue project. We didn't meet with people in Waterscape 2, but after the new government was elected in June of 2018, we wanted to touch base with our community and see where they were on sustainable planning. And of the 400 invitations we sent out, we had a response rate of 32%. The survey results were such that they reiterated the high consensus people had for environmental protection and the deep concerns they had, particularly for the new government, which at that point had tabled Bill 66 and hadn't yet, which was an omnibus bill. And then they proceeded with other omnibus bills. And so the whole aspect of consultation and meaningful input were substantially demonstrated once again. Crystal, if you could send the link, the results of Waterscape 3 and the survey are ensconced in that link. So having gone through the Segway project, we then launched Waterscape 3, the last in our series of Roman numeral projects. And this one was focused very specifically on resilient landscapes and healthy waters in South Central Ontario. We focused on the area in red, which is the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and the land between, the area in green. The land between is a unique ecotone straddling the St. Lawrence ecosystem and the Canadian Shield. And also we developed a very positive partnership with a charity called The Land Between. So we had hoped to have 10 community meetings, but our very first meeting was the night Mr. Ford declared the pandemic and the lockdown. So we only had one in-person meeting and followed that up with 6 webinars, total of 165 participants. We based it on a 20-page discussion document, and we had 2 draft policy frameworks on resilient landscapes and healthy waters, and 22 suggested priority actions. What we discovered very quickly was that people had become even more concerned, because at that point in time, there had been 2 more omnibus bills, but what was going on in Toronto. They were not the least bit interested in sorting through our 20-page document with the 2 policy frameworks and the priority actions, but they really wanted one set of strategic goals that they wanted intermingled with their own local observations and suggestions and comments, again, going with what we call the wisdom in the room. There was also a surprising groundswell that we couldn't have a 2-legged stool based on resilient landscapes and protecting waters, but that we really needed to have biodiversity with equal weight. And then finally, because this is our 3rd kick at the can, people suggested that the OHI should lead an ongoing collaborative program to protect Ontario's water and natural resources. So the outcomes of Waterscape 3 lead us now towards that discussion on water justice agenda. The final report rolled down all of the observations and recommendations into 9, 3 each on preserving biodiversity, resilient landscapes, and protecting waters. We'll see those in a minute. We took the extensive, articulate, lengthy, wordy recommendations from the report and edited them for brevity into a declaration to preserve Ontario's ecological integrity. And then we terminated the Roman numeral projects and established the Waterscape program for ongoing delivery. And we committed to an emphasis on more research as requested by participants. This is what the declaration looks like. It's really pretty, and we're going to show it to you and give you a link so that you can consider signing it just at the end of the presentation. But what is really interesting to some of you might be that, well, we're the Ontario Headwaters Institute, and you may think that, you know, we should have a priority on water. It's very similar to what Mr. Shiner said a little while ago. You know, we need to preserve biodiversity first. We need to have a resilient landscape planning system second. And then once we have those things in place, we can protect water within that framework. So here's how we suggest that be done. We can preserve biodiversity by updating the biodiversity strategy and the Ontario Provincial Plan. Now it's almost 2021, and 2021 will have COP16 on the Biodiversity Convention. It's a big year internationally. It's the 10th year anniversary of these 2 products. And therefore, there's a real need to update both the strategy, which comes from a non-government biodiversity council, and the Ontario Action Plan. There are no natural heritage targets in Ontario. They're informal. Some municipalities say they want 30% tree cover or 40% in natural heritage, but there's no targets. There's a federal document called How Much Habitat is Enough that we think should be replicated in Ontario. And then finally, we can't do that without having this actually ensconced in municipal official plans by requiring a natural heritage system planning. So we're the detail guys. Maintain resilient landscapes by using the watershed as the appropriate scale for planning. This is actually a commitment in the provincial policy statement, but it is not being implemented. And even in places where it is, there are huge developments and subdivisions approved without sub-watershed plans having been in place, putting tremendous stresses both on water for drinking as well as sanitary flow and storm flow. Clearly, we need to reevaluate the government's housing action plan, which is what's driving all the omnibus bills. And the development plan is also driving the termination, the amendments to the environmental assessment for forestry up north, and the other issues that are currently before the courts in terms of really reducing environmental assessment and other programs. And this is the creative one. Develop a sustainability lens for land use planning. Now, we've been calling for that for about 3 years. Government doesn't seem to know what it is. Ontario has a natural heritage reference manual, which provides things like buffers to wetlands and watercourses and things of that nature, but there's no actual positive articulation of what sustainable planning looks like. So that's what we think is required. And then finally, in our own wheelhouse, we really believe that Ontario should transition to integrated watershed management, ensure a strong role for conservation authorities. We've heard about that previously, so I don't have to wax on about that. I'd love to get to questions. But CAs need funding and mandates. They've actually had their mandate for the conservation of lands and for watershed management struck through, and they're currently under negotiation to try to get them back in. So we need to support our CAs. And then creating regional water boards. It was interesting to hear this morning about the First Nations Ontario Joint Committee. This would be at a more local level. This would be where the Conservation Authority's watershed report card and the water quality and quantity reports from the province and the Source Protection Committee reports on drinking water quality, all those are in silos right now. And we believe that we need to create regional water boards where those organizations and others can get together and say, what do we have in common? What can we fund that would have co-benefits in a number of areas and be economically responsible as well as clearly environmentally progressive? So we did all that through what I call the 7 guidelines for community engagement. Articulate a broad vision. We learned very quickly that our 2 policy frameworks and 22 actions were far too much. Identify and engage local champions. We tend to work, we're in Toronto, but we tend to work mostly with people north of Highway 7 and champion watershed discussions and collaborations. Have a plan for your project, could be prepared to alter it. Could be the pandemic, could be an omnibus bill. Make sure you capture the wisdom in the room. Don't stick to your briefing notes the way some people have in the last hour or so. Close the loop with your partners before you issue a report. Make sure what you're saying is what you heard. It's what they can live with. It's a joint vision. It's not just your interpretation of what you want it to be. Deliver a focused outcome and design ways for people to support that outcome. So Crystal, if you could put item number 2 into the chat. This is how we are supporting opportunities to support the outcome. We're asking people to consider signing, sharing, or even using the declaration in any way, in any responsible way to support our common goals. Those who sign the declaration, your identity is protected from the public. We would receive your email address and we would be able to inform you and engage you in further actions. Our further actions include and are going to begin with a series of 3 provincial webinars, obviously biodiversity, land use planning, and protecting water. The first one is going to be on biodiversity. It's going to be held in the last 2 weeks of October, and you will get an invitation to that if in any way, but certainly if you sign the declaration. So thank you so much for listening. I hope I've provided some indication of why I think this project engages the community and addresses water justice issues. And I look forward to any comments or questions. Oh, I'm not in the chat. No, I am. So, well, you can all see Dave's question. Our relationship is friendly and collegial and sharing information wherever possible. Waterkeepers really only has 2 entities in Ontario, the Lake Ontario and the Ottawa River. We tend to actually not talk to them very much, but the other groups on the ground are folks that we talk to. We have common goals for clean water and citizen engagement, but we do have different areas of expertise. Ours is provincial policy on natural heritage and sound planning. Other groups have other priorities, such as hydroelectric dams or restoring rivers by removing weirs and other structures. There's no discussion of amalgamation, Dave, but doesn't mean that there shouldn't be. Well, Ann Seymour, what led you to become a protector of water? So many things. I have to, and this is an interesting story, actually. When I was 13, I was recruited by a woman who was very active and prominent in a small community who was doing a lake protection committee. And her idea, and this is way back in the 70s, and there were septic tanks. And her idea, because the government was slow off the mark, was to go door to door and find out who still had septic tanks, if they knew where it was, and if they knew how frequently they had it pumped out. The brilliant thing about it is at 13, I was a unilingual Anglophone, which I am no longer, and I was paired with a Francophone. And it was just one of those cathartic moments, you know. Oh, there's other people, there's other colors, there's other cultures, there's other conditions. And so being paired with a Francophone, we were able to deal with the owners, and we went to a lot of farms, the rural area around Lac Massawippi on Quebec. So having a Francophone, it's always been important to me as a result of that, to try to understand who you're talking to, make sure that you can appreciate and respect their perspective. Thank you, Anne. We have a shy crowd. Thank you, Anne. Drainage tile is really interesting. And you know this because we've talked about this. It's not only a quantity, but it's also a quality issue. Lots of farms, for example, that are on wet areas and have put in drainage tile, they want to get on the land early, and so they increase. They almost once you cut down the forest, your water is going to run off more quickly than being slowly soaked into the ground and serving the roots of the trees. But you don't want it in your field, so you put in an agricultural drainage tile to get it off the land. A lot of the farms that have drainage tile also have permits to take water because in July or August they might need water for their crops. In the West, there used to be things called sloughs, S-L-O-U-G-H, where farmers retained water in large ponds, and then they use that water to water their own crops. So in Ontario, we have people that they get the water off the land, and then they pump the water out of the creeks to water their crops. The contamination issue occurs through bad practices. If you apply fertilizers or pesticides 3 minutes before it starts raining and it gets washed off. Now that's foolish from an ecological point of view. It's foolish from an economic point of view. And the public health officers of Ontario have recognized that there's a correlation between downstream urban gastrointestinal diseases and hospital visits and the inappropriate application of material onto farms. So there are linkages. It's primarily a bad practice, bad player circumstance, rather than anything by design. Crystal, do you know, do you have access to how many people are on and what we should do next if we can't encourage a few more questions? Oh, my time's up. How about that? A few minutes. Thank you so much. We're very different from perhaps the rest of the tenor of the day, which is about values and First Nations reconciliation. We're really policy intensive, and it may be difficult to absorb all that in a short time. Sandy Gear, are there resources you can recommend to encourage citizens to persuade conservation authorities to work together? Not really sure what you mean, Sandy. You would probably know Conservation Ontario is a provincial organization of all the conservation authorities. So the big players like Toronto do a lot of the policy work. They have a lot of employees. They have policy analysts. They can provide first blush at new proposed provincial policies. Conservation Ontario itself has one of the leading policy analysts in the province, a woman I admire tremendously. But a lot of those resources come from CAs. CAs collaborate, for the most part, in source protection committees. I think there's only one source protection committee that is on the boundaries of a single conservation authority. All of the other source protection committees or areas or jurisdictions are 2 or 3 conservation authorities. So they collaborate a lot. You can rest assured that they're collaborating right now on the policy issues, on the funding issues for flooding, and some of the big issues where they want to get their ability to work with municipalities to do watershed planning reinstated when it was removed in the last amendment to the Conservation Authorities Act. So I'm not sure what you mean. They do cooperate when and where they can. Are they collaborating on road salt? CAs don't spread road salt. They act as a resource to their municipalities. They also don't do the road salt testing, but clearly they see where the damage is. Lake Simcoe in particular has done testing, which is unusual, and issued significant reports on the salinization of Lake Simcoe, and has encouraged its municipalities to switch, and private contractors to switch to reduce salt practices, the use of brine. And there's a huge discussion, as you would know, on salt certification for private contractors. The issue is that these guys, it's easier for them to spread 200 pounds of salt and prevent somebody slipping and falling and suing them than to use 50 pounds of salt and be worried that they might get sued. So there's a whole initiative about certifying salt application so that people don't get sued if somebody slips. It's an interesting issue. CAs, we're talking about road salt. I'm just going to take advantage of the time because Anne is here, and I've talked to Anne to some degree about what's going on in Erin, where the health of the creeks that flow are there. Some of the local creeks are going to be receiving outflow from the proposed new sewage treatment plant. So you've got issues of volume of water and potential erosion of stream banks. You've got issues with what's in the water for contamination, pollution, and public health. And so the CAs tend to comment on these things, but because they are beholden to municipalities, and the municipalities appoint the reps to their boards, they really take a backseat science perspective. And they comment on official plans, but they only permit at the site level to ensure that runoff doesn't destroy footings for bridges and things like that. But they really don't have as strong a role as some of us would like them to have. Thanks all. We're being told by Crystal that our time's up. Thank you very much and have a good Saturday.